President Trump's executive order declaring the end of birthright citizenship is headed to court. I'm Scripps News' Andrew Rafferty in Washington, and you're watching Morning Rush. On Thursday, a federal judge in Seattle will hold a hearing on the order which ends the right guaranteed by the Constitution's 14th Amendment. Attorneys general representing a coalition of 18 states, the city of San Francisco, and Washington, D.C. have asked the judge to block the order, arguing that it denies constitutional rights to an estimated 150,000 children born in this country each year. Meanwhile, the ACLU has filed its own challenge to the birthright decree, this one in New Hampshire. The organization's executive director, Anthony Romero, says enforcement of the order would, quote, repeat one of the gravest errors in American history by, quote, creating a permanent subclass of people born in the U.S. who were denied full rights. Now, despite all this pushback, the Trump administration is going all in on its aggressive immigration stance. On Tuesday, the Department of Homeland Security announced that it would roll back a long-standing ICE policy that prohibits arrests at sensitive locations. We're talking about places like churches, schools, and hospitals. In a statement, a DHS spokesperson said eliminating the policy means criminals, quote, will no longer be able to hide to avoid arrest. That's the kind of news that is instilling fears in immigrant communities around the country. The Emmanuel Presbyterian Church in Los Angeles held a vigil on Tuesday night where people were able to talk about their concerns and share ways they can support one another during this time.
I came out here in support of our immigrant community. It's a very scary time with this new administration, and I want to make sure that our immigrant community, our Latino community, that everybody knows that they're not alone.
Because I know a lot of people I go to school with or I just interact with on a day-to-day, like, they don't really know their situation and how it's going to turn out, especially after the election. And I know a lot of people are worried right now, and not just in LA, but just in communities all over the country.
And Scripps News Deputy Political Director Joe St. George joins me live from the Capitol. And Joe, there's been so many changes over the past, really, 48 hours since Donald Trump took the oath of office, but there is still more to come, isn't that right?
Well, and just in the last 30 minutes or so, the Associated Press reporting that the Justice Department is directing some of their staff to probe, investigate local jurisdictions that may not cooperate with federal immigration authorities. And remember, this was a very familiar theme 8 years ago, the beginning of Trump's first administration, where you would have decrees from the federal government come down regarding deportation, immigration, federal authorities leading on local law enforcement for assistance, and you would have just outright denials. Sometimes they wouldn't even return phone calls. This would be an escalation in that relationship. With this news from the Associated Press just within the last 30 minutes that the Justice Department may investigate those agencies. I was just talking with our Scripps News station in Tucson, Arizona. Local officials there have promised to not participate with many directives given from President Donald Trump. So this is a community that would certainly be eyeing possible probing from the Justice Department here. There has been a flurry of news, and we haven't even crossed 48 hours since President Trump assumed the Oval Office once more, but we're just beginning to get a sense of how President Donald Trump wants to carry out what he campaigned on, the largest deportation task force in American history. Republicans in Washington believe they were given a mandate by the American people back in November to carry out drastic changes when it comes to immigration. At the top there, Andrew, you alluded to a big change yesterday involving hospitals, involving schools, involving churches. I was a reporter in Denver, Colorado, back in the first years of the Trump administration. I recall going to sanctuary churches. That was the nickname they were given. Undocumented immigrants would live in the basements of churches to avoid deportation. This order involving ICE, allowing them to go to churches, would in theory remove that as an option for someone trying to stay in the United States. And just as I have perspective as a journalist that I can draw upon covering the second administration of Donald Trump, President Trump has perspective too. His team, Stephen Miller, others, they know what worked, what didn't work the first time around. They've had that 4-year gap to figure out what they would do differently if they were ever given a chance. And in November, the American people gave them a chance. For the moment, though, we're not seeing those large-scale raids that perhaps people were thinking would happen in the first few days. Thomas Homan, the border czar for President Trump, saying they're focused on those with criminal backgrounds for the time being. As you get a sense, the regulatory changes, the rule changes, the procedures, that seems to be happening first before we see any large-scale deportations, Andrew.
And Joe, you know this. It was our Scripps News poll, which really was the first that caught on to the widespread support for mass deportations. I do wonder how that could potentially change public perceptions if we see these raids in places like schools, churches. But it does seem like we're at the tip of the iceberg in terms of policy changes from President Trump when it comes to immigration. A lot of it is going to need help from Congress. And we do see there might be some movement even today on passing some legislation.
Yeah, our congressional producer, Sam Lisker's tracking this for us at Scripps News. The House of Representatives could vote this afternoon on the Laken-Riley Act. It already passed the House. It cleared the Senate with some amendments, so it's back to the House today. If it gets final approval and there's no other amendments, this thing is on its way to President Trump's desk. It would be one of the first major pieces of legislation, first immigration piece of legislation that the president would sign. This deals with undocumented immigrants requiring to be detained for crimes like theft, where before it would be a much higher threshold. So this just is the beginning. I think that's the sense. If you are covering the Trump administration, we're only 48 hours in, not even. We're in the beginning of what will be a drastic change in American policy when it comes to immigrants, undocumented immigrants, and of course, deportation.
All right, Joe, so much more to cover throughout the rest of the morning and into these first 100 days. We know that's a priority for the Trump administration. Our Deputy Political Director, Joe St. George, at the Capitol. Joe, thank you.